Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. As many of you may know, my name is Chris Lustrino, and I am the founder and CEO of KingsCrowd. I first wanted to note before we began that I know that we're living during a very challenging and different time, to say the least. And so, what we thought we could do during this period where the traditional VC chat is kind of out and going to coffee shops and meeting founders is out, that we would try and do our best to bring founders directly to your living room as often as possible. So this week, every day at 3 Eastern Time, 12 Pacific, we'll actually be bringing you wonderful, amazing founders that KingsCrowd has come to know and bring them directly to your living room to be able to ask questions to and have kind of that VC coffee interaction, even if we can't do that in person. So with that, I'd love to kick it off. We have our first founder here today. We have John Fanning Jr. He is the founder and CEO of an organization called Zelgor, and it's actually the perfect company to kick off this week because it's a gaming company. And I think more than anything during this time when there's all these stresses and we're stuck at home, there's nothing better than playing video games. I can actually say that me, as an individual, I'm not a big gamer, but for the past week, I've actually picked up video games almost every day because I need something to do. So with that, we'd love to kick it off to John Fanning Jr. to give us a little intro and tell us the genesis story of Zelgor.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. Thank you so much for having me. And I think you're spot on, with the midst of everyone staying home, because of coronavirus. I think it's a great time to be a video game player. And I think you're certainly seeing an uptick in people playing games, whether it's on their phone or on their game consoles. So while it's, certainly, there's a lot of chaos going on, certainly a good time to be at home and, enjoy yourself playing all sorts of different games. And that's actually really how I got started. Really my entire life, grew up at the boom of the video game generation. I started out on Genesis, and I got my first N64 when I was in first grade, which was obviously really exciting. My mother worked in the city, so I grew up commuting to school every day, an hour back and forth. And so handheld gaming, things like Game Boy, were a really big part of my childhood growing up. And when the iPhone came out, I was in high school, and I was really excited. I was like, oh man, cell phone plus Game Boy, this is going to be really game changing for the mobile game space. And that was really the path that got me started, was, the iPhone coming out, my excitement, and my upbringing in games.
Nice. That's awesome. So you have this upbringing in games, you're playing them as a child. What was the inspiration to say, you know what, I'm going to create my own game?
Yeah, sure. I think it really had to do with the types of games that were coming out when the iPhone first launched. So, I grew up playing, Pokemon, version yellow and red and blue and all that fun stuff, and, Advance Wars and things like that. There were some really great, mobile games that had been around, since the late 90s. And so obviously when the iPhone came out, I was like, oh, the games are going to be very similar. But what happened was the space really became flooded very quickly with very casual games, where you would, things like paper toss, where you were flicking a paper ball into a trash can. Very short play sessions, 5 minutes or less, and then you would never think about it again. But it was interesting because those games actually did really well. You saw companies like King.com were suddenly worth billions of dollars, and that's just sort of what the space became, was very super casual games that you'd play for less than 5 minutes. And that was always a little disappointing to me because I always envisioned something bigger and better. And eventually I just got to the point where I said, you know what, the space is so lucrative, and it's a space that I'm so passionate about, that it really inspired me to start a company that would go out and try to build bigger and better games and really take the whole industry to the next level.
Terrific. So you've been at this for a while, and I know that, you were part of the Draper University, and you've kind of been building and working on this product. So one of the things that, we often hear, we like to help people understand about various investments, is the way that they go to market can be very different. So Zelgor, it's kind of been in this stealth mode. You're testing and iterating and whatnot. Why is it that for video games and these mobile games, you have to put in so much upfront effort, and it could be years before you actually launch the product? Can you explain a little bit about that dynamic in this market?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a famous expression in the games industry, a delayed game is eventually good, but a rushed game sucks forever. And it really speaks to, this sort of critical element about video games, which is, it's not like a typical startup or tech company, right, where you launch your product and then it works and then you make incremental improvements. In fact, we've seen a lot of game companies try to do that with games. And then ultimately, they launch and then they sputter because, it's not quite what people expected. I think people have very high expectations of games, especially, if they have to pay money up front. And for us, we're really all about building really high quality games and great experiences. So I think that's really a big part of it, is that when you play a game, you have really high expectations and people want to avoid, disappointing their players. So it's all about getting the timing right, doing one big push, and really not trying to, moving at a pace that's sustainable rather than rushing and trying to put something that's sort of half completed.
That makes a lot of sense. So two things I'd like to understand a little bit more. One, what is kind of your timing, do you think, to kind of go to market, at least with the first product? And two, can you tell us more about Zelgor and the story?
Yeah, absolutely. So Zelgor is, at a nutshell, what we're doing is we're building an army of aliens to take over the world. And those aliens are called Noobs. They're led by their fearless leader, Major Noob. And the Noobs are a species of aliens who fly around from planet to planet really looking for a new place to live. And they're rambunctious, they're ridiculous, and they're a little bit reckless. So, for one reason or another, whenever they settle on a planet, something goes haywire, the planet usually ends up getting destroyed, and then they got to pack up their bags and go find the next planet. So when we first started Zelgor, it was all about building a game where players could take over the world. I was a big fan of the board game Risk. One of the first games that I wanted to build for the iPhone was a game like Risk on top of GPS. That was actually the idea that I took to Draper University, and it was a concept that Tim and I really bonded over. It turns out he's a big fan of not only games, but the board game Risk specifically. And we sort of had similar thoughts and vision for where the game space was headed and what we wanted it to be. So we started out trying to build our first game, Noob Tubes, which is all about the noobs coming to Earth to take over the world. And that was actually the basis of our first offering that we did on Netcapital. And we saw so much traction and success and so much interest in the noobs that it gave us the opportunity to start adding other things to our portfolio as well. We had offers to make shows and movies and things like that. We're not quite at that stage yet. But it did give us the unique opportunity to pick up a second game title, which is very different than Noob Tubes, which is Noobs in Space, which we just announced a few weeks ago. It's all about the noobs going from planet to planet, looking for new places throughout the universe to explore and eventually live. It's much more of a hyper-casual game, one-touch input, very simple, very sleek, and we're really excited about it. And our plan is to actually launch that as our first game. It's a great introductory product for the noobs. And our hope is to launch that within 4 to 5 months of our offering closing.
Oh, that's terrific. So I was fortunate enough before all of these quarantines began to actually get to play that game, or at least one of the first versions. And it was a ton of fun. For someone like me who's not very good at video games, it was a perfect way to have this very simplistic kind of addictive game nature, which I really love. So plan is you kind of launch that first product that's more simplistic, easy for users to kind of engage with. And then from there, you'll get to lead them into various stories. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. We're really trying to build what we call as a galaxy of games, which is, a whole universe of noobs and products within that noobs universe, and having not just one game built around the noobs, but having multiple games. And we really want them to feel interconnected. So, if you buy, cosmetics, our whole business is really built on the freemium model, which I think has really proven to be the best business model for companies and for players. And so we want to obviously have all of our games be free to play, let people, start playing with them and engaging right away. And then, when they start buying all sorts of silly costumes for the characters, if eventually they stop playing one of our games, but they pick up another one, we want to be able to transfer some of that value from one game to the next. So that's really sort of our core strategy and what we're trying to do sort of, going forward.
Nice. So for those who aren't as big a gamers, I think some of the big names that we know are, something like Candy Crush. Would you liken it to that, where you have these multiple worlds and you kind of continue to move through them? Is that a way to kind of think about it?
Yeah, so Candy Crush is it's a match 3 game. So the puzzle that we're sort of offering is very different as you experience. But I think that's sort of a good way to think about it. Is it's sort of a levels-based game where you're doing these sort of very immersive and engaging puzzles, and the play sessions, each level only takes you, probably about 30 seconds to beat if you know what you're doing. But we sort of view NoobTubes, which was like I said, sort of our flagship game. We really view that as more of like a Clash Royale or Clash of Clans type game. Whereas, like you said, this is really more of a Candy Crush, and they're really targeting sort of two different types of gamer.
Cool. So if we can take a step back, for people who aren't necessarily gamers, but just want to understand kind of the investment thesis behind backing a company like Zelgor, tell us a bit about what the market opportunity looks like, how large kind of the gaming space is, and then we'll work back from there.
Yeah, absolutely. The mobile game space is absolutely massive. If you look at the global games industry, it's a $150 billion industry, and mobile makes up 51% of that. Last year, in 2019, was projected to be about a $68 billion industry, and you saw the top 10 games in the App Store take home about $9 billion in revenue. So the space is absolutely massive. It expands every year. And the really interesting thing that you see about the mobile game space in particular is that it really only takes one hit game to turn your company from, a company no one's ever heard of to, a multi-billion-dollar company. You saw Supercell do it with Clash of Clans. You saw King.com do it with Candy Crush. So these companies, Pokemon Go, turned Niantic into an overnight success. That was 20 years in the making. So it's an industry where it really only takes one game to see absolutely explosive returns.
Got it. And are there any acquisitions that we can use as proxies for, types of exits you can see if you're kind of going that route and being acquired by another gaming company?
Yeah, absolutely. There's tons. Tencent and SoftBank are two companies that eat up these game companies like no other. So I think that, the acquisition strategy is relatively straightforward. And, it's not like other industries where, it might be tricky to find a potential exit. In the games industry, everyone's been there and done that before. So it's all relatively straightforward.
So I think one of the fears and challenges for many investors when they're thinking about investing in this type of market and company is that, well, if it doesn't hit, it's all over. So how do you think about kind of de-risking this investment, testing it, and making sure that this is something that you think can gain a lot of traction?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great question. And I think that's really where our partnership with Disruptor Beam comes into play. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Disruptor Beam, they're another game company based in Framingham. And they have a great track record of working with really successful media franchises like Game of Thrones and Star Trek. And what they've done is their company's vision is actually very similar to ours. They started out by releasing games, and they used the technology, the back-end technology of their games, and turned it into a platform called the Disruptor Engine, which they are now using to help other companies launch and build their games. And so we got to be, I think we were the second company that they partnered with to actually use the Disruptor Engine technology. And their technology, it's supported a player base of over 20 million players. It's handled, $150 million worth of transaction volume. And if those numbers aren't quite accurate, I apologize to Disruptor Beam. But that's sort of a general ballpark. So our relationship with them, it gives us, the access to their technology to make sure that our games are, robust, they're well built, they're high quality on the back end, and they'll run smoothly, when we launch on day one. So I think that is really big for us. Nobody has to worry about, can we build a good analytics tool or a shop that works? We get all of those things right out of the box from Disruptor Beam. So I think that's going to make it, it's going to increase the speed at which we're able to produce things. And it's also going to increase the quality of those products. So we're really excited about that.
And now from an iteration standpoint, making sure you really kind of get things right makes total sense. You have some of these wonderful out-of-box products, and you also have that distribution channel that's going to help you launch early on. But from a testing perspective, just from a gamer experience, what are you doing on that front to really get it to a great place?
Yeah, absolutely. As somebody, I didn't grow up, I didn't come from a traditional games industry background. I really came at it as a player. And a big part of that was, my frustration with games like, Madden and, sort of those traditional AAA game company games where it was just like the same thing over and over and over again. And I felt like, they weren't really listening to the community. And so, I am really, we try to be as community driven as possible. We want our, our audience to feel like they've got a voice and they can be heard. So right now, we've got both games, Noobs in Space and NoobTubes, available through our Test Fairy. Which is testing software so we can push to Apple and Android. And when we launch Noobs in Space, our first game, we plan to launch on both platforms. So right now we're accepting anyone and everyone who wants to be a tester to sign up on our website. You can go to Zelgor.com. You can scroll down. You'll see the sign up button. You can sign up there. we can get information on your phone, and we can actually start sending builds of these games right to your phone, and you can start playing them right away. And then obviously we'd love to get any feedback.
Wow. So how many people have you had do that to date? And what is the type of feedback that you're getting, both positive and negative or constructive, however you want to say it?
Yeah, it's a good question. Over the lifetime of the company, we've probably had close to 2,500 people in our testing community. And we've received a lot of really great feedback that we've used to iterate over time. I think the number one piece of feedback that we get is, like, the noobs are awesome. When can I buy toys and plushies and things like that? The feedback that we're getting on Noobs in Space is great too. People are finding that it's very easy to pick up and play right away, which sounds like was your experience as well. So all of the feedback has been really positive and really overwhelming, and it's really exceeded our expectations.
So one of the things that I'm always curious about is, how do you cut through the noise? And I know we've hit a little bit on this distribution channel thing, but how do you cut through the noise of there just being so many games on the App Store? How do you make sure your voice is being heard and people are seeing you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what it comes down to is making sure that noise is coming from a voice that people trust. And there's no better way to market your game than by getting a friend of yours to tell you to play it. So, we call that sort of the discoverability factor of a game. And so I think that's really going to start with, our community internally of testers, and building a product that they're really excited about and they're trying to drive people into. And then giving them the tools to actually go out and add their friends and build these communities. So, that's really been my approach is, build a game that people want to play, that they want to tell their friends about, they want to bring people into. And I think you really have to start from there.
Gotcha. Digging into it a little bit more, how you plan to make money, the monetization model. I know you talked a little bit about freemium, but can you talk about those items that you'll be charging for, what those prices will look like, and then also, auxiliary opportunities to generate revenues for the business?
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said earlier, the core business model is the freemium model. It's your game is free to play. And then there are various virtual items, things like costumes and hats and shirts and things like that you can buy to decorate your characters within the game. We have a bunch of different characters. We're sort of going for the Pokemon type approach with the noobs, of having a bunch of different noobs with different types and colors and things like that. So, you'll probably be able to buy some noobs in the store. And, that business model alone has been really successful for companies in the space. Fortnite, I think, made $3 billion in the first year that they operated. Pokemon Go actually just surpassed $3 billion in revenue. That came out a few weeks ago. So even if that's the only model that you have, attached to your game, you can be extraordinarily successful with that. But that's not all we're doing. In addition to that, we want to do a lot of really cutting edge things with advertising. I think that, the way that people advertise in games right now works, but it's not necessarily the most gamer friendly. It's a lot of like, oh, you ran out of lives, now watch this ad, and, and 30 seconds later you can play. So, we want to do things. We want to leverage the technology in phones, things like GPS, location data, in order to give people real world prizes. So, you get coupons for a free cup of coffee from Starbucks when we're all allowed to go outside again, of course, and do things like that. In addition to merchandising, I think in a lot of games, or a lot of game studios, you'll see merchandising sort of be an afterthought, and it's like, okay, now we're on game 2 or 3, now let's release some merchandise. But the merchandise, I think, you talked earlier, you asked about feedback. That's the one piece of feedback that we get consistently more than anything else is, we want merchandise. So we want to make that available to people, as soon as possible. And then, when people buy a shirt or a plushie or something like that, again, we talked about the interconnectedness of everything. We want to give people some in-game value for making that purchase as well.
Got it. Yeah, really interesting, because I know in many ways you started out very focused on kind of that geolocation technology. Is that correct?
Yeah. So when we first started, like I said, I was a huge fan of the board game Risk growing up. I played it religiously with my family. And when the iPhone first came out, the new technology of the phone was really what excited me the most. So that's where we started, was how do we build mobile games that are great games on their own, but also leverage the new technology like Pokemon Go did with the front camera lens. So we actually built a technology platform. Right now we call it the Zelgor platform. And what it does is it essentially allows us to gamify the real world. It allows us to build games on top of GPS. So although Noobs in Space is a very sort of simple, straightforward, hyper-casual game all about exploring space and different planets, Noob Tubes is all about the noobs showing up on Earth to take over the world. And that game is actually built on top of our platform. So, the noobs will be able to take over the Starbucks in your high school and your house and things like that. But it's all, it's not dependent on physical travel like Pokemon Go is. And I'm sure they're seeing a big hit to their player base right now because obviously everyone is very limited in where they can go. But the noobs are aliens. They've got spaceships. And so obviously they should be able to fly around. And we want to support virtual movement as well as physical movement. So, that's, really what we're all about as a game company is building great games, whether it's, a simple, straightforward, hyper casual game or actually leveraging some of this new technology. And that's really what we want to do.
Got it. Excellent. So just one thing I wanted to note to everyone, during this half hour, it's always really helpful to get questions from the crowd. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom webinar. So if you'd like to submit one, I will work to make sure I try and get that answered by John. So next question for you is, okay, we're building this really exciting product. We know we're going to monetize and go to market. Tell us a little bit about the team behind this. Who's working on it? Who's making this happen?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a great team. Myself, obviously, in addition to Phil Fodrite, who's our product manager. He's been in the space for 13 years now. He's worked on The Incredible Hulk. He's worked on The Sims. I worked at Turbine for a long time, worked at Ghost Story. So he brings a lot of the traditional game experience that you might look for in a company like ours. And the two of us, have really, I think, are very aligned in how we see the space and what we want, and the future that we're trying to create for it. We also have Joy Sang, our art director. She is incredibly talented. She was actually in pharmacy school when I first met her, but her talents are much better utilized drawing noobs and adding animated content to our world. And then we have Chris as well, who is our head of prototyping. He was the person that we hired as a result of doing our first Netcapital offering. And he was able to build our first prototype of the Noob Tubes battle game very quickly. And we've been able to do a lot of really great work iterating on that. And so that's sort of our core team. We also have a relationship with Assist Software overseas. They're based in Romania, and they're able to do a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of the Zelgor platform that we've developed. And then we've also got a great team of investors and advisors as well. Tim Draper, obviously probably the most notable. He's been a huge mentor to me. He's taught me so much, and going to Draper University was really a game changer for me. And then in addition to that, we've got Nolan Bushnell, the founder of Atari, Kai Wong, he was one of the original creators of Guitar Hero, and Mike Dornbrook, who I believe was the chief operating officer at Harmonix when they released Rock Band. And we have a lot of other really great people in our deal as well, working at our company. And, we really try to combine, that traditional game experience and knowledge, because there's so much knowledge out there, with young, fresh, new ideas, and really try to sort of build the best of both worlds.
What do you think excites that group of amazing individuals? I mean, founder of Atari, like those are really powerful, wonderful people to kind of have on your side. What do you think excited them about the Zelgor platform?
Yeah, I think it's probably something a little bit different for each of them. A lot of them are really excited about, the idea of building games that leverage new technology and, leverage the camera lens to create augmented reality experience and, leverage the real world map to build games that sort of take place in the real world. But I think that also, because these people really all bought in before the noobs, but then once we introduced the concept of the noobs, they really picked up on it right away, and they really fell in love with the characters very quickly. And so I think, they've had the chance to see how all of these ideas have sort of developed over time and come together. So, I think the answer to that question is constantly changing as we make progress.
Nice. So got a great question here from the crowd. They said, who are your targets you would like to aim for? And that's from an age range. They also mentioned US or overseas. And how soon can we look for it in the App Store and Google Play?
Yeah, so I'll answer the last question first. So the first game that will be in those app stores is Noobs in Space. We're hoping that we can have those live after our offering closes. Right now, it's scheduled to close on April 15th. That could potentially get extended. But so let's say we start in June. We would hope to be ready to launch at some point by the end of September. And then from there, make sort of an educated decision based on the timing, at what point in the season would we want to launch that game. So that was the last question. What was this first question again?
Yeah, who are your targets you would like to aim for from an age range and also geographic spread?
Right. So mobile is a little bit interesting. It's not like a traditional company where you have a target market and you just hammer them over the head over and over. Mobile is really about casting a wide net and see who you pull back. So in general, we're targeting sort of 15 to 40-year-olds, people who, all sorts of different style of gamers, whether it's, super casual to sort of mid to hardcore. And we're going to sort of see who we pull in. Obviously, with the noobs, a lot of people generally think, oh, you're going after really little kids. In my experience, little kids don't like playing games that are built for them. They like playing games that their older brothers and sisters are playing.
Yeah, that's a great point. Love that. Excellent. So another question that's come in is, how does this company compare to other companies you recommend? And that's one targeted at me. So it's a great question. And the way that I always where I try and bring it back to is across the 5 key dimensions that we consider. So from a market size perspective, obviously a very large and growing market, a dynamic space that to be in, a $100 billion plus market size is really, really interesting. Founder experience, I think the gaming sector more than any has kind of these young, intrigued gamers that are going in and trying to create games that they themselves would want to use. And I think you've surrounded yourself absolutely with the right people, especially from an investor and advisor perspective. Terms of the deal, end of the day, I don't want to get too far off track, but I think a great way to think about investing in games is a little bit like biotech, right? Like it's going to be a huge success or it's not. And so from a valuation perspective, I think there's a ton of room for upside from where it is today. There's also obviously room that it could go to zero if it just doesn't click. Business model, it's a tried and true business model. We've seen these games make billions of dollars by simply going viral and having these massive user bases. And lastly, it's product or service differentiators. And I think this is the one that goes to kind of that biotech example of it either works or it doesn't. I think it's a really intriguing game. You have your unique and own story, which I love. But at the end of the day, it really will all come down to, do people connect and relate to that story and want to continue to come back and be addicted to that game? I think it absolutely has a fighting chance. I think it's a really unique game, but obviously there's always that question. Another one that came up is, in general, do you expect game company stocks to go up as a result of the pandemic? And I think you actually would probably be the better person to ask this question to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think generally I would be surprised if it didn't, right? You're seeing, Netflix and things like that, all sorts of streaming services their capacity is getting flooded. So I think, we should expect at least certain game companies, for their stock to increase over the next few months. I'm certainly not an expert or a financial advisor. But I think, like I said, it's just, I think common sense. Everyone's going to be stuck in their homes with nothing to do. So what are they going to do? They're going to, stream shows and play video games.
Awesome. One question that's been asked is, what's the easiest way to become a tester of the game?
Yeah, the easiest way to become a tester is just to go to our website and click the sign up button and fill out our form.
Excellent. Last question for you here before we sign off. One that I like to ask all founders is, as you think, 3 to 5 years out, what does success look like for you?
That's a great question. I think success for us looks like having, 3 to 5 years, we would want multiple games launched, having a player base, of tens of thousands, if not, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, and just having the ability to, continue to, have the money to make additional games and make additional progress. And, really it's all about hunting after that one big hit, because once you have that one big hit, then you have a war chest of capital to really do whatever you want. And that's really what we want to get to, is we want to get to a place where, we've got a hit game, we're established, and we can really start to get creative and build some really exciting and different things. Whether or not an exit has happened in 3 to 5 years, it's certainly possible if you look at the timelines for other companies. But regardless of, whether we're bought or, we're still, we still own the business, that's sort of where we hope to be, is multiple games launched, large player base, getting to do some really exciting stuff in games.
Excellent. Really appreciate it. Well, I know we're running up on the half hour, but thank you so much for your time. I think it's a really, really interesting offering. If people are interested in investing, where should they go?
They can go to netcapital.com/company/Zelgor and click the invest button.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much. Good luck to you. I think you're doing a lot of phenomenal things and are headed on the right trajectory, and appreciate you taking the time this afternoon to explain more about your offering.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks everyone for tuning in and listening.
Yes. Have a wonderful day, everyone, and we will see you tomorrow. Take care. Bye.